Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston Sports Podcast, part of the National Bleav Network. And joining me to talk Coogs, our old friends from the Scott and Holman Podcast, Sam Razz and Bobby Malvaez. Great to see you guys and love everything I'm seeing from those Coogs, especially Milos Uzan. Sam, can you talk a little bit about how he's evolved recently? And then Bobby, I'd love for you to get into what this means as far as the Coug ceiling going into March.
If you're looking for, I think, a big difference for Milos Uzan circa mid to late February versus the guy who was with the Cougars at the start of the season, was the presumptive starting point guard. Basically from the moment it was clear Jamal Shead would be pursuing a pro career and that Uzan would be his replacement. I think he's a guy who's more confident calling his own number, more confident in his role. And that's kind of a nebulous answer, but he looks so much more confident when he's dishing out because he's got great scores around him. And that was one of the things that I was really excited about with him, was that his efficiency numbers at Oklahoma weren't great, but also you knew coming into this team with LJ Cryer on the floor with him, with Emanuel Sharp, J1 Roberts, like those guys are going to demand a lot of the basketball. You're not going to need as much from Milos Uzan getting his feet under him, getting his confidence playing with those guys. And now, especially with that floater lately, like you're seeing a guy who is not just a capable distributor, a guy who could do all the things you ask a point guard to do, but can call his own number offensively. As much as we're the biggest Jamal Shead stands alive, like he is a program legend at a program where there are enough very good players that's a high bar to clear. Mm-hmm. Like I wouldn't put that on every great player that Sampson's had, though he's had a number of great ones here in the last 8-9 seasons. But what Milos Uzan is starting to show, just the length and athleticism he has as well, the God-given abilities he has that maybe weren't things that Jamal Shead, as much as he's a program cornerstone player, could do. He's a bigger guy. He might have more raw athleticism. So you're starting to see a guy become more confident in himself and willing to call his own number and also set up very talented teams. I think that's the biggest difference is confidence. It's something that gets pointed out pretty often when U of H gets on national broadcasts, is that Uzan's had a steeper learning curve than just about any other point guard before him. And I think that's a tough ask, but you're seeing a guy who's learned a lot here in the last 3-ish months of basketball.
Yeah, and as far as ceilings go, I think Sam nailed everything about what Milos has meant to this team. I think as ceilings go, if Milos Uzan starts playing like this and continues to play like this, right, that this isn't like a 2-week stretch, you got to think Final Four isn't out of the question for this team. One of the problems that's, I use that very loosely, problems with the teams under Kelvin Sampson is the inability to get the ball in the basket at times and to go kind of cold offensively. Jamal Shead was always kind of our go get a bucket kind of guy. And while I don't think Milos is necessarily going to be that guy for this team, if you're getting 15 out of Milos a night and you're still getting the same production out of Sharp and you're getting it out of LJ Cryer, Final Four is not out of the question, like I said, for this team.
Last few years, the storyline going into March, guys, has been injuries. It'd be nice if instead of players getting hurt, they were getting healthy, which leads me right into Emanuel Sharp. Sampson finally asked him to sit down and rest his foot, or at least the two of them agreed on that. Can you see a difference since his return?
I think the second half of the game, of this past game versus Arizona State, is where you started to see him kind of get in his groove. That first game back versus Arizona was UGLY ugly. I want to say he was 0 for 6, just did not look comfortable out there. Defensively, he didn't look good either. And Sampson has actually kind of said that there was a nice article written in the Chronicle about the fact that it was starting to seep into his defensive mindset as well. When you're a scorer like Emanuel Sharp is, and the ball's not going in the bucket, it can really affect other parts of your game. And I think we were starting to see that from Sharp. And in that Arizona game, just didn't look very good. Didn't look great the first half of the Arizona State game, but you saw him knock down, I want to say it was 4 or 5 3-pointers in the second half, and he just kind of looked like he was getting that rhythm back. And that's important to a pure shooter like Emanuel Sharp, as a guy who can attack the basket, but really is more of a spot up, take the three. Once you see one go in, you could kind of start to build up there.
I'll just also say he had a couple steals against Arizona as well. So like the effort's always going to be there. I think he's an underrated defender because he is asked to do so much as a shooter, and because he's shown himself to be quite good at that in stretches in his career.
All right, the third positive, stay with the little guys, LJ Cryer, who's shooting 41.8% from three and averaging 17 points over his last 7 games. Is this his most consistent stretch of the season, Bobby?
Yeah, I would say it is. I think it's probably his biggest stretch in his most consistent stretch in his U of H career, where you saw Sharp go down and you get a little concerned with that. And we were actually talking with the Arizona Wildcats, some people who run a site there, and they were like, we got to look out for LJ Cryer. And I said, guys, Emanuel Sharp's back. That's probably why Cryer has been where he's at. But man, he keeps on going. You know, that's really all I can say is you think he's going to slow down eventually, and maybe you're going to get that like dud of a 6-point game from him, but we just haven't seen it in the last couple of weeks.
I would just also add like that this is a guy with a great reputation going back to when he played at Baylor as a shooter, but he's improved so much defensively. Like that the book on him when he came from Baylor is just okay. Well, great pure shooter, like was on some Baylor teams that collectively could really shoot the ball, and yet himself was, you know, I think shot for a season closer to 50% than you often see from guys at this level, but was part of teams that were also just very, very lackluster defensively and was a big culprit there. That Sampson saw that maybe bad defensive reputation and still saw like, no, this guy can actually defend at this level. And I think has proven as much. Like has been an every game starter this last season, some change for 2 elite defensive teams. So he's brought the shooting to this team, and he's brought, I think, a level of consistency this season to what Bobby said that we haven't necessarily seen previously in his U of H career, but that he's also able to defend at the level Kelvin Sampson asks of his guys and be out there 30-something minutes a game. I think that's been the most remarkable thing to watch about LJ Cryer's evolution as a Cougar.
If we're talking wild cards with this group, Mylik Wilson, how surprised are you at what he's been able to do this year? Did any of you see this coming?
I've always liked Mylik as a defense and rebounding guy. You kind of take Kelvin Sampson. Really, if he believes this guy is good enough to be in the rotation, like, okay, well, he's gonna be a tough dude. He's gonna give you positive minutes off the bench. But full transparency, I didn't think he would have the stretches he's had as a scorer this year. It's made a very good team even more difficult, because that's not something Bobby and I baked into kind of our predictions. Like we didn't think, okay, well, Mylik Wilson's going to take a step up. I think when we previewed the season, Bobby, we kind of talked about Mylik and a guy who's missed a lot of time hurt, unfortunately, Ramon Walker Jr. collectively. Like if you get anything more out of those guys than you've been getting over their career, which is great bench energy, scoring maybe once in a blue moon, if you get something a little bit better than that, man, this team becomes even more dangerous. And I don't know if it's happened with regularity, but I mean, the other night when U of H was really building its lead against Arizona State and Tempe on Tuesday night, it was Mylik Wilson was a big part of that. Mylik Wilson was giving energy off the bench. The Kansas game, obviously unbelievable big shot to force the second OT. But like in the first half of that game, Mylik Wilson and J1 Roberts, maybe early on, were the only thing keeping that from being a big Kansas lead at the half. That was keeping the Cougars within striking distance, which I think was just incredibly important. And yeah, didn't expect it, but it's been fantastic to see Mylik add the scoring to the toughness and rebounding stuff that we knew he had in spades.
Yeah, and for me, I was one of the more critical people of Mylik Wilson in this season. There were times where I am fairly certain I have texted Sam and gone, what in the world is Mylik doing out there? What are we doing here? And then I said there was like a 9-day stretch where U of H didn't play around the Christmas break time. We came back and I just have done nothing but eat crow on Mylik Wilson since the start of the year, and I couldn't be happier to do it. It has now gotten to the point where I am texting Sam going, why is Mylik not on the floor? Like
if he plays less than 10 minutes, Bobby's like, well, Mylik only got 8 minutes. Maybe like I know Kelvin Sampson's won hundreds and hundreds of basketball games, but maybe Mylik should have gotten 15 minutes. This guy loves Mylik Wilson.
So I went from a large Mylik Wilson hater to actually Mylik Wilson could be the key to this team in March.
Absolutely. That's great. I want to ask you guys who the Cougs' most indispensable player is, and does the team have a flaw? In just a second, we'll answer it shortly. But before we roll on, let's talk a little bit about Underdog Fantasy real quick, because our listeners will have a blast playing Underdog with their unique approach to fantasy sports and simple pick'em style format. You can select players you know are going to outperform expectations without the traditional daily fantasy drawbacks. If you're a fan of drafting your own guys, which many fantasy owners feel, hey, that's the best part Well, Underdog has simple drafts where you select a team and compete for serious cash. You'll find all the major leagues and college sports on Underdog. It's got a user-friendly format, making it easy and fun to play. Why not start right now by clicking the link you see in our episode description and using the promo code HOU. If you do come aboard, you get a free pick and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Not a bad deal. So go check out Underdog and download their app to your favorite mobile device. All right, guys, nobody on the Cougs is more Kelvin Sampson than Joseph Tugler. I mean, this guy is Kelvin Sampson right there. It's him and one guy. This dude averaging 5.5 points. That's terrible, right? No, but he's second in the country in defensive box plus minus. He's averaging 3.5 stocks. And I'm guessing, I don't know what you guys think, he makes some end of the year all defensive teams.
I would think so, with his shot blocking peripherals and just what he does, what he does when he's in the court. And you've seen it kind of in a negative way, in that, like, when he's in foul trouble, you see how much, I wouldn't say easier, because it's not easy with any configuration of this Cougar team to score against him. But what he does, I remember the Arizona game in particular, because he had about mid-20s, I think he finished with 23, 24 minutes in that one because of some foul trouble. And not that you ever did a bad job defending Arizona, but you saw how much tougher, even with the traditional size that the Wildcats had, getting inside and making things happen. And he made some things happen offensively as well when Tugler was out there versus when he was kind of sitting to keep him out of any further foul trouble. He's been fantastic. And like I told the Arizona guys that Bobby mentioned earlier, he is ahead of where J1 Roberts and Javier Francis and some of the other Cougar big men of the recent past were 2 years in. Like, I think he's still raw there, but I think another year or two, you're going to see a guy who's an elite offensive rebounder, an elite shot blocker, and is actually, like, you don't put your hand over your face when he tries to do something offensively. Like, I think that's where he's going to be eventually. And it's not there yet. Like, he should probably be your fifth option more often than not when he's in the court, but you see the building blocks, even with his weaknesses, to be very, very good.
Yeah. For me, JoJo is kind of just one of those guys that the defense always has to account for. And one of my favorite things is on that pick and roll monster that Sampson loves to run, is watching him kind of run back, but then he finds the open guy. And there's nothing funnier to me than JoJo Tugler closing out a 3-point shooter. And the 3-point shooter thinks he's got this, like, really nice open shot. And then here comes a 6'9" guy with a 7'6" wingspan and just shuts down everything. And you just watch shots just hit rim or come up short because the shooter's going to have to change at the last second.
And also defending the inbounds too. Just like that guy. Imagine trying to get a ball around this guy's wingspan. It's insane.
It's unreal considering, I mean, what is he, 6'7"? His height?
Listed 6'8", but probably 6'7", yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, you know, the thing is, he's second in defensive box plus minus. The guy who's third, some guy named Cooper Kupp. So, you know, just give that guy a little bit of props because he's got a lot going on over there. Just amazing season from that kid. We know how good he's going to be. But I want to ask you guys, who is the Cougs' most indispensable player right now? Is there one player they just can't afford to lose going into March? I'll let you take it first, Bobby.
If I had to choose anyone, just from maybe not even a production standpoint, but Wani Roberts is going to be the guy. He's the leader of the team. You can see when the Cougs need a bucket or need a big momentum play, Wani's kind of the guy who steps up there, and you kind of depend on, he's the steady hand, which, funny enough, if you would have told Sam and I that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we probably would have looked at you like you were crazy that the offense kind of ran through Wani. But if Wani goes down, sure, you have JoJo and you have Javier, but it doesn't feel the same without Wani out there.
I might give kind of a weird answer here. Javier Francis, because I picked Roberts, because I do think if this team didn't have Javier Francis for, like, Tugler, very good. All the things I said to you, Robert, previously, believe them just as much as I did 2 to 3 minutes ago. But if you basically had just JoJo Tugler and J1 Roberts as your big men, I think this team is in trouble. I really do think one of the things that makes U of H so uniquely difficult is that you have a guy in Francis who could start for 200 something Division I teams coming off the bench. He started for you last year, and I think was a net positive for you that you have him as a luxury off the bench, that even if JoJo Tugler does like he does on Tuesday night at Arizona State, gets 2 fouls quickly, which is not the first time that's happened. It really was a struggle early in conference play. I think it's gotten better lately, but for a young guy who's going to foul a decent amount, having someone like Javier who can, I think, be a reasonable approximation. He doesn't have the insane wingspan that Tugler does, but it's very close. I think he has like a 7'4", 7'5" wingspan for a listed 6'8" guy, that he is also a positive offensive rebounder, shot blocker. And you could probably apply this to any of the big, if you lose any of those guys, you lose Roberts, you lose Francis, that three-headed monster at big men, LJ Cryer, Uzan, Sharp, those guys might get the headlines. Like guard play might be a bit more sexy, but that's what puts U of H among the best in the country, is having those three guys. And if you didn't have JV or Francis, being able to give you what JoJo Tugler gives you while he deals with foul trouble and the growing pains of being a second-year college player playing for Kelvin Sampson, I think you'd be in a lot more trouble if you didn't have that. That's my out-of-the-box answer.
So you think the depth is better this year, but it's still a little scary if something happens with the big guys, according to, I feel like both of your answers sort of go that direction.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's better depth, but there's 3 big men, and you have 2 on the floor at any time. If one goes down, especially if it's going to be Javier or Wani, you start to get a little concerned with JoJo Tugler's ability to stay out of foul trouble, and then you're going to have to start playing a small ball game with somebody like Arsenault at the 4 or something like that.
And you've had it for moments, but it just doesn't seem like a lineup that Sampson really loves. And obviously it's a lineup that would have its limitations against some teams with more traditional size. Like you have a smaller than average team, but that's because you have Francis and Tugler with absolutely freakish wingspans. Like if you subtract 1 or 2 of those guys, like it starts getting a little more dicey.
In the last few years, there were 2 giant Cougar concerns going into the big dance that I felt anyway, and it was depth and shooting. And I'd say shooting is 100% not a concern this year. Depth, much less of a concern anyway. Is there a kryptonite to this team? What's the weakness, guys, going into the tournament?
I would say there's 2. Sorry, Sam, if I'm going to steal yours, you can elaborate on mine. 1 is always going to be health, not necessarily depth or anything like that. But the on-the-court thing is tempo. This team plays very, 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 very slowly. I want to say bottom 5 in the country in the tempo in which they play, according to KenPom. And we've seen at times this year, teams can kind of draw Houston off sides, for lack of a better term, but just kind of, and especially if the crowd is really into it. In fast-paced games, crowds get into it a little bit more and live and breathe on every shot. And you can just kind of see like Milos gets out, Emanuel Sharp just kind of gets out and just kind of starts firing the ball with 25 seconds left in the shot clock. And you're kind of like, whoa, no, hold on, let's slow down. So I think that's something that I've seen Houston, I don't want to say struggle with, because I wouldn't say we've struggled with it, but definitely one of those things where you can see how Houston will start to get a little caught up in the other team's tempo.
Yeah, it's funny. I would have 100% answered that, but I will say you have a pretty strong refutation of that from the Arizona game. Like Arizona is a team that was the fastest tempo teams in the country. And I would say in the first half of that game actually did speed the Cougars up a bit, did make it seem like they were making the game played at Arizona's pace. But I would argue the last 20 minutes of that game was played, and not all of it was the Cougars winning, obviously, but it was played at the Cougars pace. Even when they were trying to come back, I noticed being there in Tucson, how much more deliberate Arizona was bringing the ball up. And I was just like, this doesn't look like they were the way they were playing in the first half. But I mean, Alabama did, I think Tech did it at times, even though I don't know if I would say it's a super high tempo game, but I mean, you look at the commonality of some opponents that beat the Cougars this season, although I don't think Auburn made that game early in the season a super fast one. I would say it's foul trouble, which kind of goes hand in hand with depth. I think this team has been better at defending at the elite Kelvin Sampson level without fouling, but this is a 9-man rotation. Like, and this isn't a knock on him because Jamal Shed was this exact way as a freshman, but Mercy Miller probably isn't ready for this level of action yet in his career. And said Lot probably the same as well. So that gives you nine guys really. And then that means you lose one there and you start, I mean, really it's 8. I mean, I know at some point we're hoping for Ramon Walker to come back, but it's been a while. It's been a month and some change now. So it might just be this rotation of guys. And if you have Milos Uzan and take your pick of one of the three big men we mentioned earlier, get into foul trouble, winning the basketball game starts to get much more difficult. Now, again, this team has been tested on the road by some very good teams and have had some games that felt like close to the worst case scenario in terms of foul trouble and came out unscathed. But that's what would give me the most heartburn, getting a crew that really gets whistle happy and then having your point guard. Because there's not, I mean, Mylik Wilson has done it at times, but there hasn't really been another guy besides Uzan that I've been comfortable with the ball in his hands a lot. I mean, there was 2 minutes against Arizona that went very, very badly. And Sampson basically didn't take Uzan out for the rest of the game because just no one else was handling Arizona's ball pressure that well. So I would say foul trouble and depth. And I do agree with Bobby that if a team wants to play the game at a much quicker tempo than the Cougars, I think that's been proven to kind of stress this team out at times, though hasn't been proven as recently to actually win a basketball game against them.
Yeah. I just want to ask Bobby on tempo. Do you feel like it almost is an advantage though a little bit to have a slower tempo in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I think that absolutely is an advantage, especially if you control it. What I mean is more, we've seen a couple of times this year, and to Sam's point, early on, and I think in every game in which I'm thinking about this, we have come back to kind of control the tempo, but I think a slower pace is advantageous in March, less possessions, less chance to score. It's just, does Houston get drawn off sides by other teams' tempos and try to match a tempo rather than slowing down and playing at their own tempo that they want to play at?
Bobby and Sam, have you seen a top 25 team yet that scares you because of matchups or talent?
No, because I mean, this team, which I think was a much worse version of this year's Cougar team, went toe-to-toe with Auburn. That was a 5-point final margin that I don't think was reflective even of how close that one was at the Toyota Center. Yeah, you lost them in a quasi-home environment. You don't feel great about that, but that's the A1 number one team in the country right now. You look at their resume, like I know Duke right now is technically number one in KenPom, but also and Duke's a very good team this year. This is not me taking a shot at them necessarily, but the ACC is a garbage league this year. Like there are 3 or 4 good teams in that league max, and they're doing what you should do to bad teams, but Auburn's the best team in the country to this point. And the Cougars went toe-to-toe with them. And that was with Milos Uzan playing in I think that was his 3rd game total with the Cougars. So. J1 Roberts and Javier Francis both weren't at 100% health in that one. Like, this is I'm not saying this team would guarantee beat Auburn. Like, that's a very good basketball team. There's a reason why they have 14, I think, quad 1 wins to this point. But there's not a team out there that I don't think in Bama, top 5 team. You lost to them, but like by just about the narrowest margin possible. There's not a team that I don't think the Cougars can beat. That's not me saying U of H is unbeatable, but I saw U of H in person go toe-to-toe with the current number 1 team in the country and lose by a very close margin. I don't think there's a team out there that is definitively better than the Cougars. I wouldn't have said that all of the last 7 or 8 seasons, even with a lot of very good U of H teams in that 7 or 8 season stretch.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Sam. I don't think there's anyone that has me terrified and petrified. Obviously, Auburn's going to be one. Duke, another really good team that you'd prefer not to play rather than play. But yeah, I don't think there's anyone that I look at and that I just go, oh my God, there's no way we're going to. Do we have an answer for X guy on a team? I would prefer not to play Alabama because for some reason it seems like Nate Oates just absolutely has some kind of curse over Kelvin Sampson coach teams, but I think it's pretty obvious who's ahead, not who's ahead of the Cougars, but who would be a little bit concerning. Duke, Auburn, Alabama, Florida's looking really good right now. So kind of the guys who are in the top 5 with you, those teams are going to be the ones that are scary, but you're going to have to beat those teams eventually if you want to win a national title.
Have you guys seen what my Missouri Tigers are doing right now?
I saw they beat Bama.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, they just didn't beat Bama. They scored 110. They took that game wire to wire. They had the lead.
4 years ago, I talked about Dennis Gates as a future star when I was previewing Cleveland State versus U of H in the round of 64 in that year's tournament. So now I am not surprised to see him at a bigger job succeeding.
And let me just say, it's brought me such joy. One night I watched the Cougs, another night I watched Missouri Tigers, then I watched the Cougs and the Tigers. what I will say is Missouri, talent-wise, they can match up with anybody, and it's as impressive as I've seen defensively. The Cougars, they play just real solid defense. Missouri, it's hectic. It's chaos. We're going to turn you over. We're going to make things happen. They are nuts. I'm telling you, they can beat anybody right now. They can go into the tournament. They can beat anybody in the country on any given. I think you want to stay out of Missouri's bracket the first 3 or 4 rounds because they're dangerous right now. And they've got guys 1 through 10. I mean, they can roll out 10 different guys. They got a shooter that might be the best in the country right now in the way that Caleb Grill's shooting the ball. But just a heads up on my guys right now. I
looked at their KenPom page. I will say, like, them being the number 1 team in the country at getting the free throw line, as I said with my answer, the Cougars can get into some foul trouble sometime. That would very much give me a heartburn if it ends up being a future matchup.
I just want to know what the listeners think. Get in the YouTube comments. Look for our Cougars history playlist. At the end of this show, you're going to see links pop up to our Bill Yeoman tribute, an interview with Phi Slamma Jamma's Reed Geddes, an interview with the King biographer Miran Fader about his life, and a Game of the Century tribute. So we've had some really cool shows about some of Houston Cougar history that you guys are going to love. They're must listens, I think, if you're a fan of the Cougars and the background and all that. But if you're a new fan of the show, please subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. And last thing, guys, I want to ask you about. Haven't talked to you since Willie Fritz went to work after the season. What's got you most excited about his recruits or coaching hires?
Seeing a full class of his and getting in here and actually seeing what the next step is. Not as much turnover as last year, but still a decent amount. Like the class, I think it's pretty obvious. Connor Weigman coming in is going to be super exciting, but I think more exciting than him is the revamping of the offensive line. It's hard to get good to build an offensive line through the portal, but by golly, Willie Fritz is going to try doing it. So that's kind of what's got me excited for next year, is just seeing how this offense will completely change.
I think also just seeing in this one season, and granted it was a lot of not pretty. You were the worst offense in the country at scoring points I think you saved it fractionally, Bobby. I think we were 133 out of 134 in scoring offense because of that, the one game under interim OC Sean Bell at BYU at the very end. I think that's going to be a lot more cohesive, that side of the ball. Like, I know no coach has ever been turned down a position that they didn't take. Coaches only get hired to the one position they wanted, but like, I'm pretty sure Willie Fritz wanted his current OC Slade Nagel there. Last year, it sounded like some family stuff. He wanted to stay in Louisiana for another year, coached on Brian Kelly's staff at LSU. Comes in. The good news for him is the bar is set so subterranean low on that side of the ball that, hey, like, if he produces like the 75th best offense in the country, it's like, wow, like, he had one of the most improved units in the entire country. And just also the defense proved itself to be so good that's the one thing. I don't think anything leaves a bad taste in your mouth from a season where you didn't really have an expectation other than just like guys playing harder, the vision looking a little more cohesive. And I think they mostly checked those 2 boxes, but the defense was good enough and you return enough on that side of the ball that you have the 75th best offense. I have a hard time not seeing this team go bowling. And will a season where they just clear the bar of going bowling excite me forever? No, but given the last few seasons, it would be it would represent a very nice step in the right direction. Like, this isn't going to get built quickly, but I think you're seeing the pieces for a team that's going to be a good amount better than last season. I'm not willing to stamp it, guarantee that it's a bowl team right now here in late February, but I think I could talk myself into it a little easier now than maybe 12 months ago when we were trying to figure out what his first roster was going to look like.
The H in H-Town these days means, holy cow, we need offense. Cougars football, Texans football, Rockets, guys, get us some offense. Let's get better at that side of the football and basketball. For the 3 Coug junkies out there who are not subscribed, go look for the Scott and Holman podcast. Tons of weekly content. They are part of the 10-12 podcast network, which covers all, 78 teams in the Big 12. I've lost track. Just can't thank you guys enough for giving me a few minutes, just in a really busy time, I know, for you guys. Thanks a bunch.
Always great talking to you, Robert.
Thanks, Robert.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.